Imagine this, you walk into a crowded room buzzing with laughter, noise, and the clamor of 100 simultaneous conversations. Yet, in a dimly lit corner, someone sits alone, serene, unreadable, almost detached. They are not lonely, not sad, not waiting for someone to notice them. Instead, there's a distinct energy about them, like they're elsewhere, deep inside a realm far more compelling than the room could offer. You feel drawn to them, not out of pity, but out of curiosity. Who chooses solitude in a world obsessed with connection? This image is not a coincidence, it is a pattern. Throughout history, the most intelligent and perceptive individuals have often stood at the edges of society, not because they were outcasts, but because they chose to be there. Why? Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." It's in that haunting dissonance between inner truth and external triviality that intelligent people begin to detach. Not because they believe themselves superior, but because the noise around them rarely echoes back the depth within them. For those whose minds are tuned to subtlety, to contradictions, to the undercurrents beneath surface-level interactions, the world can feel like a relentless assault on their sensitivity. The small talk, the posturing, the incessant chase of validation, all of it can feel like a performance they were never meant to be part of. Intelligence, especially when married with introspection, becomes a form of exile. Not externally enforced, but internally accepted. Arthur Schopenhauer, the dark prince of pessimism, put it bluntly, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. This isn't misanthropy. This is about the weight of awareness. The more a person sees, the more they begin to realize how blind the world prefers to remain. But detachment doesn't begin as a grand philosophical gesture. It starts in childhood, in the pause before answering a question, in the confusion of why others seem content with what feels hollow, in the pain of being misunderstood when trying to articulate something deeply felt. Over time, this becomes a reflex. They stop explaining. They stop trying. They start watching instead. There's a cruelty in this clarity. For when one begins to perceive patterns in human behavior, the masks people wear, the roles they assume, the lies they tell themselves, it becomes difficult to participate without feeling like a fraud. Authenticity demands sacrifice, and often that sacrifice is belonging. Jean-Paul Sartre famously declared, "Hell is other people, but perhaps hell is not others, but the inability to connect without diluting one's soul." Intelligent individuals do not run from people. They retreat from pretense. They long not for absence, but for presence, the kind that is rare and sacred and soul-affirming. Until then, they wait, they detach. And so begins a journey, both liberating and isolating. A journey inward, toward the self, and away from the clamor of consensus. But what lies on the other side of this detachment? Is it wisdom, or is it suffering disguised as enlightenment? There is a peculiar burden that intelligence carries, awareness. Not the glamorous kind of awareness celebrated on social media or in classrooms, but a slow-burning, often unbearable consciousness of everything beneath the surface. An intelligent mind doesn't just see what is, it sees what could be, what should be, and what is being ignored. This acute perception, though powerful, comes at a cost. Viktor Frankl, a man who faced the horrors of Auschwitz and yet birthed a philosophy of meaning, once wrote, "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. For the intelligent person, the world often feels abnormal. The frantic pace of consumption, the obsession with status, the performative empathy, the erosion of silence, all of it grates against their intuitive understanding of what matters. And so their withdrawal is not antisocial, it is, paradoxically, a defense of sanity. To feel deeply and to think deeply is to constantly carry contradictions. They notice the irony in people's moral outrage, see the self-interest behind charity, hear the emptiness in overused affirmations. Where others are comforted by platitudes, the intelligent are tormented by the truth hidden beneath them. Detachment then becomes a natural consequence of being unable to reconcile the world's surface with its depth. But this awareness does not only apply outwardly, it turns inward with equal sharpness. Intelligent individuals are often their harshest critics. They dissect their flaws, question their motives, and dig into their wounds not out of masochism, but because they can't not. To live in the mind is to be in a house of mirrors, each reflection more distorted, more revealing than the last. It can feel like drowning in one's own perception. Aldous Huxley once warned, the more powerful and original a mind, the more it will incline towards the religion of solitude. He wasn't romanticizing suffering, he was recognizing that depth doesn't mix easily with distraction. And in a world where distraction has become the dominant language, solitude becomes the only place one can hear their own thoughts without distortion. This isn't to say that intelligent people hate society. On the contrary, many of them care so deeply that the world's indifference wounds them. Their detachment is not fueled by superiority, but by a devastating kind of empathy, a desire for truth, authenticity, and meaning in a culture that trades in artifice. Nietzsche observed, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." Yet what if the intelligent person, so absorbed by the search for why, finds that most people are only concerned with the how to get richer, how to be more admired, how to appear virtuous? The resulting alienation is not voluntary. It is structural, built into the very fabric of a society that often rewards superficiality and punishes reflection. This is the crossroads at which many intelligent minds find themselves. They want to connect, but not superficially. They want dialogue, not just conversation. They seek presence, not performance. And in the absence of these, they drift, not aimlessly, but deliberately, toward the quiet margins of life. It is here, in this tension between longing and renunciation, that their detachment deepens. But does detachment protect them, or does it slowly hollow them out? It is a cruel paradox, to see clearly in a world that thrives on illusion. The more intelligent the mind, the more prone it is to noticing the fractures beneath society's polished surface. Where others see harmony, they hear the dissonance. Where others laugh easily, they feel the hollowness echoing beneath the laughter. Depth becomes a curse when it cannot find a reflection. Carl Jung once remarked, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." But what happens when awakening isolates you? When the act of looking inward places you in a different dimension than most of the world? Intelligent individuals, especially those driven by existential questions, begin to feel like exiles in their own time. They don't just think differently, they feel differently. Emotions, ideas, values, everything is magnified. They are moved by poetry, disturbed by silence, undone by beauty, and tormented by the contradictions of existence. Meanwhile, the world around them continues to march on, powered by routines, social roles, and accepted narratives. And so, the intelligent person begins to withdraw not from life but from performance. They begin to unlearn the language of societal conformity. They become fluent in ambiguity, silence, and nuance. They grow allergic to certainty, to propaganda masquerading as truth, to shallow optimism. In conversations, they grow quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand too much. They see the layers. They feel the futility. Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism laid bare the absurdity of modern life. He said, "Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance." The intelligent person doesn't merely understand this, they feel it in their bones. This confrontation with absurdity becomes their silent companion. It strips away illusions but also leaves them exposed, raw, and alone in their insight. Detachment, then, becomes less of a decision and more of a survival instinct. It is how they cope with the relentless pressure to dilute themselves, to become legible to a society that only rewards easily digestible identities. And yet, the hunger for connection does not vanish, it simply evolves. It becomes more selective, more sacred. The intelligent person begins to seek not company, but communion. Not a crowd, but a kindred soul. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "Ordinary people merely think how they shall spend their time. A man of talent tries to use it. But intelligence also reveals the futility in so much of how time is spent. Chasing approval, obsessing over perception, decorating lives that feel vacant. The intelligent person begins to see existence itself as a question mark, not a blueprint. And in that terrifying freedom, they retreat, not to escape life, but to meet it on their own terms. But make no mistake, detachment is not peace. It is a wound, clean, silent, but always bleeding. The intelligent may walk alone, but they are not unfeeling. In fact, their sensitivity is often what exiles them in the first place. They yearn for intimacy, but not if it means sacrificing authenticity. They would rather starve than feast on illusion. And so they walk through life like ghosts among the living, watching, thinking, feeling, but rarely seen for who they are. Their detachment, both shield and scar, becomes their truest companion. Even the most reclusive minds, those cloaked in silence and anchored in solitude, carry a pulse of longing. Detachment for the intelligent is rarely a cold act of dismissal. It is, more often, a form of mourning. A grief for a connection that seems impossible within the bounds of ordinary interaction. They do not isolate themselves because they don't care, but because they care in ways too profound, too complex, to be easily reciprocated. Viktor Frankl, in his search for meaning amidst unspeakable suffering, wrote, "Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. For the intelligent soul, that is the ultimate hunger to be seen, not just looked at. To be understood, not merely heard." But how often does that kind of communion truly occur? Most conversations exhaust them. Not because the topics are dull, but because the intention behind the words often lacks depth. They crave questions that linger in the air, silence that says more than sound, and vulnerability that trembles with honesty. Yet, in a culture built on speed, performance, and distraction, such intimacy is nearly extinct. The intelligent person detaches not because they have given up on connection, but because they are waiting, hoping for a resonance that feels real. This withdrawal is bittersweet. On one hand, solitude becomes a sanctuary, a place where they are not required to shrink, censor, or simplify. On the other hand, solitude amplifies the ache of being unseen. They become fluent in loneliness, not as a temporary discomfort, but as a permanent climate in their emotional landscape. Friedrich Nietzsche warned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." The intelligent person often fights the monsters of conformity, ignorance, and mediocrity, but in doing so, risks becoming a cynic. Their detachment can curdle into disdain. Their sensitivity can harden into superiority. And their longing, if unmet, can calcify into bitterness. But not all who detach surrender to despair. Some channel their solitude into creation, writing, art, music, philosophy. They speak through symbols, metaphors, and silence. They reach others not through small talk, but through soul talk. They become lighthouses, distant, steady, guiding, but rarely approached. They offer insight as a gift, not to be praised, but to be used. Even in silence, they are in dialogue with the universe, with themselves, and with anyone who dares to listen deeply. Aldous Huxley recognized this sacred distance when he said, "The more powerful the imagination, the less imaginary the results." The intelligent mind, left to wander in isolation, doesn't just fantasize, it constructs entire inner worlds. These realms often feel more vivid, more truthful than the outer world they detach from. Reality becomes just one dimension of a vast internal multiverse. To visit them there, one must bring more than words, one must bring soul. Yet, no inner world, no matter how rich, can fully replace human connection. The intelligent person knows this. And that is their tragedy. They retreat not because they want less from life, but because they want more, and the world keeps offering them less. Their silence is not absence, it is hope. A fragile, flickering hope that somewhere, someone might look past the mask, the mind, the metaphors, and truly see them. Beneath the quiet eyes and contemplative solitude of the intelligent individual lies an internal battleground. It is not a war between good and evil, nor between intellect and ignorance. It is a war between the desire to belong and the refusal to betray the self. This conflict is subtle but merciless. It defines the very architecture of their detachment. Jean-Paul Sartre, with his ruthless clarity, captured this tension. If you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company. For the intelligent person, solitude is not just an escape, it's a test of self-worth. Can you sit with your own thoughts without drowning in them? Can you stand outside the crowd without becoming less human? These questions do not haunt the shallow. They stalk only those whose minds have dared to wander into the abyss. What makes this conflict unbearable is its moral ambiguity. Connection often requires compromise, editing oneself for the sake of social ease, dimming one's insight so others feel less threatened, pretending to care about things that feel hollow. But for the intelligent person, such compromise isn't just inconvenient, it is corrosive. Each social performance chips away at authenticity. And yet, total withdrawal feels like a betrayal of another kind, a denial of the very human need for closeness. So, they drift, torn between the cathedral of their mind and the desert of disconnection. They crave others who understand, but when those people do not appear, they question whether they even exist. Are they seeking too much? Or is the world offering too little? Carl Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But in becoming truly oneself, one may become profoundly alone. The intelligent person sees this and still chooses the path inward. Not because they want solitude, but because they refuse to wear a mask. And that refusal makes them seem distant, aloof, or even cold. In truth, they are burning quietly with unmet yearning. This existential detachment is intensified by their philosophical orientation. They are not satisfied by comfort or convenience. They want to know why they exist. What lies beyond appearances, what meaning can be carved from a transient life? Such questions alienate them further. In a world obsessed with the how, they are preoccupied with the why. It's not that they do not love, they often love deeply, dangerously, permanently. But their love is not simple. It is not transactional or convenient. It is vast and spiritual, rooted in mutual understanding and shared inner truth. And such love is terrifying to most. So they are met not with reciprocation but retreat. Arthur Schopenhauer described this loneliness as the tax one pays for being extraordinary. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, he said. But even Schopenhauer knew that the cost of such isolation is steep. The intelligent person carries a library in their mind, but few are allowed to enter. Not because the doors are locked, but because few ever knock. And yet, the longing remains. Not for crowds. Not for admiration. But for that rare moment when another soul, equally burdened by insight and equally unwilling to lie, looks across the silence and says, without words, I see you. The path of the intelligent recluse is not simply a road that winds away from others, it is a spiral inward towards something vast and difficult to name. Over time, detachment becomes more than a coping mechanism, it evolves into a way of being. In the space where connection once lived, something else takes root, a kind of transcendence that only solitude can offer. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating the conscious and unconscious self. For the intelligent individual, detachment is not only a refuge from superficiality, it is also the soil in which this deep psychic integration begins. Through solitude, they confront their shadows, their contradictions, and their latent capacities. Alone, they shed the false layers imposed by society. And in that shedding, they begin to see themselves not as roles or identities, but as a raw, evolving force of consciousness. But this is not romantic solitude. It is brutal, sacred, and often excruciating. There are nights when the silence feels endless and the mind turns against itself. Days when the world feels impossibly far away. And yet, through that suffering, something new begins to stir. The intelligent person starts to realize that their isolation is not emptiness, it is a different form of connection. A deeper one that does not rely on words or validation or even presence. It is connection to being itself. Aldous Huxley, reflecting on the mystical experience, wrote, "The more you know, the more you see that what truly matters lies beneath the surface." The intelligent person doesn't just retreat from society, they dig underneath it, tunneling toward the metaphysical. What begins as detachment from others often becomes an encounter with the eternal through nature, art, introspection, or spiritual awakening. And here, paradoxically, the intelligent person finds a strange kind of peace. Not because they have conquered loneliness, but because they have transformed it. Their longing has not vanished, it has widened. They stop seeking a single soul to understand them and start listening for the quiet intelligence of life itself. The rustle of trees, the arc of starlight, the rhythm of breath, these become conversations. The universe, once cold and indifferent, now seems intimate. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning amidst death camps, left us this truth: when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. The intelligent person, finding few places to belong outwardly, begins the inward transformation. In solitude, they stop waiting to be seen and begin to see everything. The tragedy and the beauty. The illusion and the truth. The self, no longer fragmented by contradiction, becomes integrated, luminous. This does not mean they return to the world unchanged. But when they do return, if they do, it is as a different kind of presence. No longer grasping for belonging, no longer wounded by misunderstanding. They come back as observers, healers, artists, mentors, offering what they have distilled in the crucible of solitude. Not to everyone, but to those who are ready to receive it. Nietzsche once wrote, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." The intelligent person, having detached from the noise, now hears that hidden music. It is not always joyful, but it is real, and it is theirs. In the end, detachment is not exile, it is initiation. It is the lonely, necessary fire through which the intelligent become whole. Not above the world, not beneath it, but finally profoundly within it on their own terms.